Hello, and welcome everybody. Welcome to this 44th already Platform Academy session. Once more, I am joined by my friend Andrew Barnes. I'm very grateful that he's here and talking through this awesome topic with us. Today, this will be a little tougher nut than usual, a little more technical than usual, but I really hope this topic will help you all understand how you can secure your workflow automation products. And this is a live webinar. We have a presentation, of course, but today we also get some nice little demos presented by my friend Andrew. Please give a quick introduction to yourself.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. 44, that's amazing. I remember your first one. Um, Thank you so much for having me today. I'm Andrew Barnes. I'm a product success director. So I work in a post-sales capacity here at ServiceNow. Been doing ServiceNow stuff for a little over 10 years, at ServiceNow itself for 5 years. And I just love joining these sessions. And so love to hear from you today in the chat and ask questions in the question and answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. 5 years is where I almost am at ServiceNow. So hi, everyone. My name is Lisa. I live in Germany. I've been with ServiceNow for almost 5 years. I'll have my anniversary in February. I've been working in the ServiceNow space for over 7, almost 8 years now. I started in the Helsinki timeframe roundabout. So I'm curious to know when all of you started and when you first had some contact with Flow Designer. So put that in chat, please. I live in Germany, as I said. I am responsible on the platform outbound product management team for the workflow automation tools, and that is Flow Designer, Decision Builder, and Process Automation Designer, which coincidentally are the products we're talking about today. I will go through some housekeeping slides. You know this one, our safe harbor statement, just in case that we're talking about any future-looking things. Please don't make any purchasing decisions based on what we say today. This academy is part of a larger set of academies that are run by my colleagues in the Platform Outbound team. We have academies about next experience, about mobile, about virtual agent, about our very hot topic, AI, including Gen AI, of course, analytics, and way more. And then I think we'll get into some details about today's session. So first of all, I'll do a very, very quick intro of workflow automation. What is it? Which products are included and what do they do? What are they good for? Then our first part will be application access. So where can you develop your workflows? Second is designer access. Which tools can you use to create your workflows? And how much can you do with them? And then third, execution access. So when your workflows are created and published and deployed to your prod instance, what happens when you use them? How do you determine what can be read, written, updated, or deleted with those workflows? And to give you a quick high-level overview of the products we're looking at today, mentioned before, we have Flow Designer. Flow Designer was started as a business rule replacement engine way back in Kingston or even Jakarta. But by now it is so much more, and it is 100% or even 120 and more percent replacement for workflow automation, after async business rules, scheduled jobs, inbound email actions, inbound REST, all kinds of things. So if you haven't, all kinds of things. If you are interested, all of the stuff that is possible with Flow Designer, I encourage you to take a look at the Center of Excellence articles, and most specifically, the migration session that we did for Flow Designer in the past. Basically, Flow Designer is the heart workflow engine at the heart of ServiceNow, and it drives all automation on the Now platform. Second, Process Automation Designer, which is a kind of extension to Flow Designer, because Process Automation Designer, every individual activity runs on a flow, subflow, or flow action. So the good part is you can reuse what you already created in Flow Designer to build out your complex cross-enterprise processes with Process Automation Designer. The awesome part about PAD for short, is that it also provides you, your agents, your process workers, with an intuitive UI so that they can get guided through their processes and know what is the next step, where in the process are they, which information is required to drive the process forward. And then third, my favorite product in these, and I do love all three, but it is my favorite, is Decision Builder. And Decision Builder is an amazing way to decouple your decisions, your logic, your conditions from your flows, which is very amazing because it saves you complex if then else constructs. It makes your flows so much easier to read, and moreover, you can hand over ownership of decisions, how much discount you want to give, what is the right group to handle a task, what is the right text that you want to send out in a notification. So all of these smaller decisions, but also bigger decisions, can be made in Decision Builder, call from Flow Designer, call from Script, and so on. So definitely look at Decision Builder. It's really cool. I love it. And with that, what are we doing today? Basically, when we're talking about Flow Designer, pattern, also decisions, there are multiple levels of access control that we have in our platform that you can use to determine where you can build your processes and flows. That is the application access. So which apps can you build them in? Or can you build them everywhere if you're an admin? Second of all, what can you do with your designer? Do you even have access to everything in the designer? Maybe somebody is only allowed to create subflows, but not actions. Maybe somebody can only use some parts of Decision Builder. We'll find out more about that in the second part of this. And then the third layer is execution access. So once you have your logic deployed, what happens then? What kinds of records can you access? What can you update? What can you do with your logic? And that'll be explored in the execution access part. Now I give it up to Andrew.
Thank you, Lisa. So yeah, I'm going to talk about that bottom layer first. So we're going to talk about how you gain access to these tools in the platform and how you can get granular access. So we're going to talk about delegated development today. So delegated development is an ability for you to grant users and groups granular access on a scope by scope basis to different parts of the application building arena. So we don't want to give everyone admin, and we may not even want to give the same user the same access in all applications. So across different scopes, they may need different levels of access. And delegated development is the capability in the platform that allows us to unlock that ability. So the kinds of things that you'll find in delegated development is, whether or not you can access all metadata types or specific ones like integrations, UI builder, flow designer, security. So whether or not you can manage ACLs. Then some higher tier stuff of like, can you publish this application? Can you control the ability to connect to source control? Can you delete the application? So there's a very, as you can see with all the toggles here on the screen, it's a very granular way on a scope by scope basis to grant access to users and groups to that scope, to those capabilities in that scope. Now, not everyone is going to see delegated development the same way in your instances. And why is that? And the answer is, so you
Why
might see it
is
this
that?
way. Yeah, you might see it this way when you go to Dev Studio and you go manage developers. But if you go to Dev Studio and you don't see manage developers, you'll see and manage collaborators. And that will mean that you have App Engine Studio installed. And with App Engine Studio, since that tool was designed to scale out the number of distributed developers, we realized we needed to create some groupings of those permissions to make it easier to grant those to more folks faster across more scopes. And so we created what are called collaboration descriptors. And those are groupings of those delegated dev permissions that you can then grant out as a group. So if you have the managed developers, you don't have App Engine Studio, but if you have App Engine Studio, you'll have this application collaboration, which contains those collaboration descriptors. And that is also part of the management process there in App Engine Studio. We won't go into detail, but it allows you to do things like approve granting those rights to folks and using things like decision tables and flows to automate the decisions and know which ones need actually approvals or which ones get auto approved. So with that, we're actually going to quickly do a real poll while I get set up to do a demo to show you what this looks like.
Nice. So we have a quick
So I'm
poll.
going
It's
to,
just one question, and we want to know if you are using any form of delegated development already. And that is a large number that says no. So now that you learn about it today, I hope you will be considering it together with the 20% who are considering it.
awesome. So while you're answering that poll, I'll go ahead and get started and show you what the app collaboration descriptors look like in an instance. So I have 3 here, which are groupings of it, but I'm going to actually create a new one real quick. So we're going to give it a name for Lisa.
Yay.
And then once we save it, we're going to be able to choose those delegated dev permissions that we're going to group together in this descriptor. Now, I'm going to hit edit. And this is going to, all of these in this little collection box are the toggles from that other screen. So I can choose that Lisa can use source control. She could publish to the app repo and use Flow Designer. We've got to give her decision tables because it's her
Oh,
favorite.
yes.
And notifications and process automation designer. So this collection of permissions will now be able to be granted to multiple users across multiple scopes much more efficiently using these collaboration descriptors. And the way that that's leveraged is in something like App Engine Studio or Developer Studio. So in App Engine Studio, when I'm on a app, I click this little collaborate with others. And we're gonna pick let's be Bob. Bob can, oh, I have to refresh it. But what you can see is the descriptor will be available here. The Lisa one would be available here. I don't wanna take the time to refresh the screen, but we would choose the for Lisa one and hit send. And then depending on the automation that I've got set up in App Engine Management Center, it will go to an approver. So it'll create a collaboration task and there'll be an approval. And then the right people will approve that. And then the role will be granted to those users, in this case, Bob. And then Bob would be able to use those permissions that they've just been granted. All right. So our results for our poll were, what is that? 12% delegated dev,
Yes.
15% considering it, and 68% not doing any delegated dev right now. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. This next part is now about the designer access. So we want to understand, and after we have chosen the scopes, the app scopes that people can work on and create their artifacts in, now we want to determine what kind of permissions you have to work with each of the designers that we do have. That is Flow Designer, Process Automation Designer, and Decision Builder. For Flow Designer, we have a couple of roles in our system. And I will also post a link for an article later that has all of the links, all of the resources. You don't have to remember these. I will post that later and you can look all of that up. But basically, Flow Designer has 3 different levels of roles. One that allows you to create and modify either flows or actions. So if you have the flow designer role, you can create flows and subflows. If you have the action designer role, you can create actions. Interestingly enough, in this place is that the action designer is not included in flow designer. So that has to be granted individually. Next, in one of the recent releases, I believe that was Tokyo or Utah, we added read-only roles for Flow Designer. So sometimes you have some business owners, business process owners that do want to look at the flows, how they're being built out. And you can grant permissions to those folks to look up how they're configured, to understand what's happening, but then also to look at operations, which are the execution details of any of those artifacts. And then third level are reporting roles that allow you to look at dashboards like the FDIH dashboard to understand flow usage, flow executions, and to help debugging or understand if when there are a lot of flows that might be stuck and you want to get into the details of that. The next slide, I believe, is Process Automation Designer, which has a little different setup of roles, but the idea is basically the same. You're either a full process admin, and included in the full process admin role, you can have permissions to be a content author. This allows you to create activity definitions. You can be a trigger author. This allows you to create trigger definitions. And you can be a process author, which allows you to assemble triggers and activities into a process. And all three of these are included in the full process admin. Next, there's also reporting access, because that totally makes sense to have maybe someone take a look again at process executions, find out which ones are executed most, which ones maybe take long because they get stuck at some point because some action is not being completed. This helps you understand how you can improve your processes. And then lastly, there's a number of shared roles that are needed for playbook experience configuration. So being able to view or edit experience activity types and properties, that might be useful too. And because you can also create your own activity UIs, I think those roles are involved in that as well. And then third, this is really a presentation of threes, which is very, very neat. I like threes. Decision builder roles. We have 3 products, we have 3 layers. This is amazing. In decision builder, roles are set up to be depending on what people can do in decision builder. First of all, again, a kind of read-only role. So the decision table reader is allowed to look at decisions. They can view the inputs, they can view the rows and conditions, but they cannot make any changes except for they can export to and edit in Excel. This is a good role to assign to very low code or no code business process owners and decision owners, to let them actually do decisions or update decisions, decision details without changing anything about the architecture of the decision table. The decision result editor is allowed to only edit the result column entries, but not the definition of the result columns. The rule author is allowed to do everything above and edit the whole row, including the conditions and the result entries, but not the configuration and the layout of the columns. And then lastly, we have the decision table admin, or if you're just a regular admin, you can edit everything in the decision table, including inputs, including deciding what condition columns do we have, which result columns do we have. And then I think Andrew also has a small demo prepared for this part.
I do. Thank you, Lisa. So I am now in the same instance, but as a different user. So this user that I'm at is shockingly called Decision Reader. And so we're
Oh
going to
my,
go
what
ahead.
can they do?
So this user has the decision reader permissions. And so this is mostly a read only role, but they do have the ability. So I have this decision open here. And so I can see the inputs, I can see the conditions, I can see the results, and I can export them. So I've got the little export button, but I can't make any edits. So I can't change any of these um, the choices for the results. I can't change the conditions, but I can see them. So this
And
is
you can
very
test.
handy for,
I just
and I
noticed you
can
can
test it.
test, which is awesome, which is also a new feature,
Absolutely,
by the way.
that is a new feature. You know, we also snuck in drafting there today. I'm going to quickly impersonate another user, which is going to be a shockingly similar name. So we're going to do decision, uh, emoji decision editor. So we're going to use that intermediate user. And we're going to quickly switch over to that user. We're going to reload our decision table here in the decision builder interface. And we'll see now that this user, what what were they supposed to be able to do? Let's go quickly look at our cheat sheet. So that is a very similar to the table reader, but we should be able to now edit result column values. So can we edit result column values?
Well, you have to
Oh,
create a
I have to
draft
create
first.
draft. That
Yes.
I just updated this version now that we have drafts, and now you have to do drafts.
Yes, you can
So
do
now I
drafts.
can change the value of the results here.
Nice.
And now I can save that, and then I could publish it.
Perfect.
And this gives me a warning. Are you sure that you would like to publish it? And then now in our theme of threes, we're going to impersonate the author. And then we'll quickly reload the decision builder interface.
Yes.
And we're going to reference our handy list here. What should the author be able to do in addition to the other things? Is they should be able to rearrange the table rows and edit the conditions. All right, let's see if they can do so. We create a draft, and now we should be able to get a new add a row here, which we can
Yes.
do. Yay! And is, and we'll choose, 10 people now for the number of people. And we had cars for 10 people. Oh, let's go with 4 cars for 10 people. I don't think 2 will cut it. And then we would save and publish that. So that is, very quickly what it looks like when the users with different roles are able to interact with Decision Builder.
So we got roles out of our way, and now we come to the more complicated things, and that is access to individual things in your interface. And that will be over to you, Andrew.
Oh, I was coming this. Yes, I was. Look at
Yes.
that. Hey, it's back to me. I handed it off to myself. Thanks, Andrew. So feature access, absolutely. So similarly, where we were talking about the different roles that you can grant for Decision Builder, we have some very granular permissions able to be done in Flow Authoring. So we can assign those roles to these individual features to unlock those capabilities at a very granular way. So Lisa put in this handy note there. So if you turn this on, this is not turned on by default. So if you turn this on, you need to make sure that you don't remove permissions that otherwise were already being granted to users unless you mean to. So you need to go add in things like flow designer, flow underscore designer, and action underscore designer to the appropriate areas in the flow authoring features so that you make sure that you're granting the right amount of access to each of these that you want. So what are some of these flow authoring features? So we've got things like testing, being able to copy a flow. So there may be times where you have users that you don't want to be able to copy flows. Whether or not they can create a code snippet. So there's certainly users that just don't need to be able to do that, and so I can just hide that from the interface from them, and they don't need it, and they don't even need to know about it. So the ability to narrow down what's available in Flow Designer this way is a very handy feature to help make sure that the right users have the right access and and don't get overwhelmed with options that they really shouldn't even need. So you can hide them from them, which is pretty great.
Yeah, I think this is a
Similarly,
very neat feature. It's hidden. It's
it's
very
kind of
well hidden.
unique in the ServiceNow space as well, though.
Yes, but it is very awesome.
It is. And paired with that, in a very similar concept, is content filtering. So the on the previous one, we're talking about the features. So the different things in the interface, like the activation or testing of the flows. We also can narrow down the content that they can interact with in flows. And so, why might I want to do that? So, there's a lot of cases in where I would like to be able to control who has access to things like spokes and particular actions in spokes. So, I have some very powerful things in a tool like ServiceNow. Like, lots of companies have things like Active Directory integration set up, and you can use the Active Directory actions to add users and delete users from your Active Directory. And there are definitely users that I don't want to be able to have that capability in the platform. And so content filtering allows me to be able to show and restrict different actions and spokes from users. Additionally, so that's the actions part there. Additionally, I can also control things like logic. So when you think about Flow Designer, you've got those three tabs when we're adding a new activity in flows. So each of those, we can control what's in all three of those. And that's pretty great. So I can control the actions, the logic, and the subflows available to the users based off of the content filtering. And the things in the top right, I get to control with the feature access. So, how does all this work, you might say? And I'll answer with, well, let's go look at it.
Let's look at it.
Let's go look at it. So, if we return to an instance, and I just need to move the interface just a teeny bit so I can find where I'm at. All right, here we are. We're in a ServiceNow instance now, and I'm going to narrow down my menu to process. So I should get process automation, and under flow administration, we're going to go down to content filtering rules. So this table holds the rules, and I have already set up some rules. Then we're going to see how they work today. So I have decided that the connect spoke, so we have a spoke installed called connect, and I've decided here in this instance that I need to restrict the access to this spoke to a particular role and only that role. So I've set up this filter rule that's based off of this role and a resource definition. And a resource definition helps me define what this is filtering. So this is whom it is filtering for, and this is what it's filtering. So let's drill into the resource definition to see what that is. And it will be defined as the flow actions that are from this particular scope, which is a spoke. So what you'll see in there is a condition builder. So you pick the table, and I pick the flow actions table, and then you build the conditions. And my conditions for scope is the connection spoke. And that will narrow down the three actions in that spoke to only be available for the users with the role AJB test. Let's give this page a full reload.
The cool part, and maybe you have seen that in the list that we had before, the feature access configuration that we do in that list where we add the roles to the different features, those will also show here. So the underlying architecture is the same for both of these features. And it is good to note that it is an architecture that we will be carrying over to other products as well. But we do plan to improve on the interface because we know right now with the list and forms experience, it's not very intuitive, but we are planning to update that. This is a safe harbor statement, so you won't get any timeline on this from me. But we do want to make it a better experience. But one of the main reasons why we're having this conversation today and why I wrote the article is that I think this feature is very underrated and not many people have seen it before or understand how it works and how powerful it can be to filter these things down. So especially for things like spokes, consider spokes that are uh, working with your HR service delivery product, right? You don't want anybody, just anybody to update users in your employee resource system. That is just not
Absolutely.
something you want done. And this is why you can have these definitions. And I see you found the page. It works.
I did.
Nice.
So this is that resource definition. So it was application is the connect spoke, and that gives me the three matching conditions. So there are three actions that meet that. So what we can see is if I go and impersonate this user that I need to impersonate, doo, 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 we're going to go impersonate Eileen. Eileen has that role. And so anyone without that role isn't going to be able to see it, but Eileen will be able to see it. And so I'm going to quickly be Eileen. I'm going to refresh my flow because we need to refresh it because we changed who our user was and make sure that it understands that we should filter. And that will take hopefully just a moment. And in this, in the sake of time here, I'm not going to show the negative case, but be assured that anyone other than the folks with that role are not going to be able to see the actions for the connect spoke. So if I filter my search actions, so you see the little spinning right there? What it's doing right then is actually going through all of those resource definitions and the filters that are applied for those and building the list of the ones that this user has access to. And so you can see, I can see these three. And if I impersonated any of the other users that have access to Flow Designer, you would not be able to see these because they don't have that ability. And one of the things I'd like to note is if you open a flow that you have the ability to edit, but it contains one of those things that you don't have permission to access. So if I opened a flow that had the connect actions in it, and I wasn't a user who could use that, that flow becomes read only for me,
Oh, that's very neat.
just
I
because
didn't
it
know.
contains that. So you can't go in and change one, even if you have access to change that flow normally, you wouldn't be able to change it because you don't have the ability to access that action. And so it doesn't want you to be able to modify that flow because you aren't allowed.
That makes so much sense.
All right. And so that is content filtering, and I'm going to hand it back to you for API access.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think feature access and content filtering is highly interesting. But now we cross over from our second part to our third part into execution access. So now that we've decided where we can build our workflows and how we can build our workflows, we can now determine what our workflows can do and how they can run. We have APIs for each of our three products, which have, dependent on how long the products have been around, a different amount of methods that we can make use of. One of the larger sets of APIs that we can use are in the Flow Designer space. And the most obvious one would be to run or trigger a flow. And to do that, we can do that either from a server-side script or from a client-side script with the Flow API. The handy part about Flow Designer is that it'll generate this code snippet for you, so you don't have to write all of this, and it gives you some instructions on what is expected for the inputs. Do you need to provide maybe a table or an object or string as inputs? And then you can decide whether you want to run your flow either in the background, so asynchronously, or in the foreground, which is synchronously. To run a code snippet from a client script, you'll need to use the Glide Flow API over the Flow API, the Glide Flow API over the Flow API. But again, Flow Designer will create that code snippet for you. And as far as I know, client-side scripts will run synchronously anyways. But to make this work and to use this, you first have to activate the checkbox that says callable by client API, and that is a per flow setting that you can set in the flow properties from the overflow menu in the top right. And then,
Similarly to how you do for script includes.
yes. Exactly. So you first have to enable that and make sure that the flow knows that it is allowed to run in the client context. And then for some very special use cases where you want to accelerate the flow execution even more, we do have .quick methods to append to the Flow API. And this makes the flow execution faster because it does not create execution details and context records, but it will still be logged. So you will still know that the flow ran, but it won't create any of the execution details and thus be a lot faster. One niche use case where this could be used is if you want to run a small, this is important, small subflow or an action from a before business rule. So since Flow Designer is currently only available asynchronously or in the after context, this means that if you do want to run some logic in the before context, before a database interaction, you would still need to use a business rule, and you could use the quick method to do that with Flow Designer. Then we'll get over to Process Automation Designer. Process Automation Designer has so far the most limited set of API. They're mostly really backend API that we might be using to run it, to insert an optional activity into a running process. This API is being used in our playbook experience component, for example, for the add activity UI action that is in there, playbook action. And then Playbook Experience API has a couple of options to list running executions, start or cancel executions. And we're also planning to add a restart API. I believe that's scheduled for the Washington release, but again, safe harbor timelines may change. But the restart option will be really handy for those use cases where you just have to go back in a process and restart a phase, for example, a stage. And then for decision, there are a number of API methods available for decision tables, quite a lot actually, which is really useful. You can look up all of the things that make up a table. You can choose to only look up rows. You can choose to only look up all of the results. You can add and edit. You can actually and delete rows or decisions or results or whatever through API. There's a live coding happy hour session linked in the Center of Excellence about using the decision table API to actually construct a whole decision table. But the most useful ones that you will probably use are make a decision or make decisions. So what it does is to either get the first decision that evaluates to true. That's the same options that you can see in Flow Designer, or get all decisions that evaluate to true, which will output an array of result elements for you. Because this is also a neat little thing that you would really like to not write yourself every time. We're, again, Safe Harbor, introducing a code snippet option similar to what we saw in Flow Designer earlier. We will bring that to decision table, to decision builder as well, which is also very handy. And it'll just give you all the inputs, some recommendations, and also the outputs on how you want to use that. So much for APIs, I think, and I will hand it back over to you, Andrew.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. So now we're going to talk about run with roles. So um, we would like to, continue on that vein of, the execution layer and what you can do there, which is in Flow Designer, we have this capability called run as, and you have some choices there. So if you run as a system user, then you're effectively running as an admin. And that mostly allows you access to write to nearly all of the ServiceNow tables and capabilities. And I say nearly because there are times and places where you can't, as admin, access things. So specifically, when a scope has enabled application administration, that prevents an admin, the admin role itself, from being able to interact with those tables natively, as if we had ACLs there. So that is definitely a time and place for that, and we're actually going to see that in the demo. Is HR is a good example of when the admin role doesn't have rights to write to the HR tables. Run as user. So this is the ability to the user that is part of that invokes the trigger for the flow. So if you have an insert or created trigger, then the flow will run as that user that invoked the trigger. And when would this be useful? Well, it certainly can be useful when you want to have access to something like an HR table. So if any of the HR table users are invoking triggers that then update HR table entries, then running as that user is very handy, and it shows that it was from that user and grants the ability to write to those tables because it's running as that user. And the last one is runs with roles. And so this is a scenario where you don't want to run with as system, and you're kind of running as the user, but you're adding a layer on top specifically for that flow to add an additional role. So it's kind of like you're instantaneously granting a user a role, running that flow, and then removing that permission immediately before they can do anything else. And so you might
Just to
need to grant.
note,
Oh, go ahead.
you're not actually adding the role. So
No, you're
don't be
not.
alarmed about subscriptions or anything like that. It's not actually adding the role, but the
It's
flow
like
has
you
the
were.
permission. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe I didn't make that as clear as we should. Is it is as if you were doing that, but you're not
Yes.
actually doing it. So let's take a look at what that looks like in practice. So I'm going to
Yay.
return to my handy dandy screen. Okay, our last demo for the night will be to show a flow with runs with roles. So what happens is in our flow right now, if I go over to Flow Designer and take a look at our flow, we have the trigger is on an instant, is created or updated, where short description starts with invoke. And then we update this HR case. So most users are not going to be able to update an HR case under many scenarios. So if specifically, if I'm doing user who initiates the session. So only users with HR roles
that can already write to that table would this flow work for? So let's see that in practice. We're going to come and use our test user here, Aileen, and she is going to create an incident with our trigger, invoke the things, and we're going to save that record. That's going to trigger our flow, and it's going to update this HR case. So we are going to refresh this HR case, and we're going to not expect to see any change in our HR case because the user doesn't have the rights to write to this table. So we told it in the flow to update the description right here. So if I return to Flow Designer and I take a look at the operations for this action, I will see that it's in state error. And the reason it's in state error is because that user does not have the access to that table. It's prohibited by security rules. So I can do one of two things. The thing that I'm going to do is adjust the properties to not run as a different user. So I don't want to run it as system user. I need to run it as the HR writable role. So that's going to be SN underscore HR underscore core dot case writer. So I'm going to be able to write to HR cases only in the context of this one particular flow. So when I hit update to that and then activate, I'll be able to return to the same user in the same session even and perform that same activity. And this time my flow should work. So I'm going to reload the incident submission form. I'm going to invoke with role now. When I hit save, I should be able to now go check the execution record. It has completed and no error this time. So we expect now the description to contain I'm updated from flow. And if we go to our HR case and we refresh that HR case, we should see that completed now. And it did. I am updated from flow. And so that concludes our demo. Thank you.
Nice. We do
And
have a
back to
couple
you,
of
Lisa.
minutes. Yes, we still have a couple of minutes, so we'll go through this one real quick before we head out into our conclusion. So on the platform, there has been a feature called restricted caller access for a while. And you may think this is kind of left field. What does this have to do anything with workflow automation? In one of our recent releases, I believe Tokyo or Vancouver, we added the capability to choose flows and flow actions as a source in this feature. But you may ask, what is this feature? What does it do? So if you are an application developer and you want to protect your application scope and all of the artifacts that are in your application scope, you can do that with restrictor caller access privilege. So this has something to do with the cross-scope privileges that you may have heard of before. But what this feature does, it allows you to do a couple of things, and that is either you can completely block all access from outside sources to your application things. That can be tables, that can be flows, that can be actions, that can be other logic automation on the platform. And then you can also track those cross-scope requests. So you can set up an approval and say, hey, okay, let me check this. This new flow that was created by my colleague in another team wants to access the data or the tables in my app. And once you approve it, then their flow can do that again and again, but there will be an approval first. Or the third, the most permissive version would be to just notify you if an outside source wants to access your things. So this is also a way to restrict what your flows and processes can do in other application scopes.
Yeah. And so, to give you a bit of a concrete example, in the flow that I was just showing that updated that HR table, the flow itself was in the HR scope. So it could do that. If I had created that same exact flow with the same permissions and the same users were doing the activities, but I was just in a different scope, it would not work because in that instance, I have it set up to restricted and it would then request the ability, but it wouldn't have it until it's granted for it to execute against my tables. And so I would get a different error in Flow Designer telling me that it's restricted due to cross scope access.
Right. That is a good example. HR scopes, we are very protective of our employee data. And that's why our HR service delivery applications are set up in a way that only the very, very minimum amount of access is being granted, or if it needs to be granted, there's an approval process to do that. These restrictor caller access privileges can have different settings, so it can be scope to scope, so accessing one scope from another scope, the access from a scope to a target, the access from a source to a scope, or source to target, while sources and targets can be any kinds of things. So source types can also be flows and flow actions. And I think we made it. We made it. I am amazed 77 people made it to the end. I can understand there's some people being left behind. I told you in advance, this is an advanced topic. This will be a little more difficult to follow, but I'm very glad for everyone who did stay with us and now understands that we have 3 different levels on which we can restrict access to our workflows on the platform. So some key takeaways and recommendations that we want to provide you with before giving you giving you all of the resources to recap this, to look at the recording, to maybe read through the whole huge article series that I wrote. So if you want to look up anything of what we talked about today, I just posted the link to the articles in the Center of Excellence. This is such a big topic. It's actually 3 articles staying in the in the system of 3s. When you're doing this, do a good planning, please. Consider any current access levels before implementing any of these things. Determine the right stakeholders and authorized approvers for access levels. This is for things like application collaboration. It's important for things like the restricted caller access. And make sure to establish clear communication with all stakeholders, everybody who would be developing on your instances, and so that they understand what they can do with the designers, what workflows they can build. Execution, pick the right features for your requirements. Remember that you can layer them, you can combine them into a feature in an access set. And then make sure to use catalog items and groups to manage this access. So grant and remove roles as needed. This will make your life so much easier than going in manually and adding them person by person. Lastly, documentation as always. Make sure to document the access restriction definitions and their implementation. Create dashboards and processes to audit and review those permissions. And with that, I will head over into thank yous. We're at time. Just a quick shout out. I think there weren't any complex questions, but I did post the community post. So if there are more questions, please post them there and we'll try to answer them as we go into the next weeks. I've already shared the Center of Excellence with you. That's your hub to get updated on workflow automation. And the next sessions for the Platform Academy will be moved out a little bit. So the next, in 2 weeks, the next session is actually being moved by 1 week because there's Thanksgiving in the US. So our next session will be on November 30th instead of the 23rd. Jason Lefevre will join me with updates on Playbook Experience. And on December 7th, he will join me right away again to talk about process automation designer updates. So if today was interesting to you, join us on these 2 dates as well. And that is everything I have for today. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining me today. Thanks for everybody who joined us for this academy. I hope this session was helpful for you. Be sure to fill out the survey, and I will see you in 3 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Andrew.